Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Rahul Mahajan. He's a sociologist and author of Full Spectrum Dominance, U.S. Power in Iraq and Beyond. Hi, Rahul.
Hi, Sonali.
Saudi Arabia is continuing its devastating air war against its impoverished neighbor Yemen. On Saturday, the deadliest airstrike of the war so far killed 120 people, including women and children. The strikes were aimed at a power plant in a residential area. So many lives were lost that bodies were buried in mass graves on Saturday. A spokesperson for Doctors Without Borders told AP it just shows what is the trend now of the airstrikes from the coalition. Now it's a house, it's a market, it's anything. Saudi Arabia, which is the major player in a U.S.-backed coalition, announced a ceasefire, which was to have begun at midnight last night, but fighting continued to rage on the ground between Houthi rebels who have taken over the country and Saudi-armed Yemeni forces. Rahul, there was almost no U.S. coverage of this devastating death toll from the airstrike over the weekend, and even the UK's BBC, which did report it, put the number of dead, 120, in quotes in the headline. Is that because it's our friends doing the killing?
Well, with 1,700 at minimum civilians killed, this is certainly something that deserves more news coverage, although, of course, it's competing with a lot of events in that region. But that's not quite how I would say it. I think what happens is that it's the nature of the victims that determines how much coverage there is. So there is no reason in any American political discourse that Yemenis matter in the least, or are perceived to matter. It's the nature of the aggressors that determine what's the character of the coverage. So, for example, if it's our allies, then the military operation will come to seem natural or beneficent, even without specific words being used. If it's, say, Palestinians being killed, it's often hard to tell from the news article who exactly killed them.
And President Obama continues his tour of Africa this week, arriving in Ethiopia today after his visit to Kenya. In Ethiopia, he met with Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn for several hours in a closed-door session. Ethiopia has been a vital U.S. ally in the fight against the Al-Shabaab militant organization in neighboring Somalia. Still, Ethiopia faces its own struggles with human rights violations, including the unjustified detention of journalists. Earlier, during his visit to Kenya, where his father hailed from, President Obama made a lengthy speech veering into personal territory. It was the first time he has visited Kenya as president and called himself the first Kenyan American to be president of the United States. He also used his platform to demand that Kenya respect gay rights, a direct snub to President Uhuru Kenyatta, who referred to the issue of gay rights as a non-issue. Well, Rahul, how does the president of the U.S. come off lecturing African countries on anything, given that U.S. policies in Africa, even under Obama, have been quite destructive?
It's odd enough for a president who discovered he was in favor of marriage equality only yesterday to be lecturing Kenya about gay rights. But if we look at the larger picture, we don't have to go very far back in history. Just think of the 2006 Ethiopian invasion of Somalia, which was fully backed by the United States, and in which estimates are that possibly as many as 16,000 people were killed. It was against a militant extremist organization, the Islamic Courts Union, but of course the invasion and occupation actually only served to spread Islamist jihadist sentiment and organizing in the region. The United States backed that. It was the Bush administration that did it, but Obama hasn't repudiated it and has effectively owned it, just as he's owned the invasion of Iraq. With that kind of record, the United States is certainly the last entity that should be lecturing other countries. It's occupations like that directly often lead to domestic human rights violations like those Ethiopia is dealing with now.
And finally, here in the U.S., the body of Sandra Bland was laid to rest on Saturday in Lisle, in Illinois, just outside Chicago. The 24-year-old African-American woman became the newest symbol in the fight against police brutality after she died within 3 days of her arrest in a Texas jail. The New York Times' Charles Blow described her funeral as celebratory and defiant. Ironically, as the national convening for the movement for Black Lives met in Cleveland, Ohio over the weekend, they were met with an incident of police violence. as Cleveland cops targeted a 14-year-old African-American boy for arrest after slamming him to the ground. Black Lives Matter activists confronted the cops on the streets. A white officer was captured on several videos, calmly pepper spraying dozens of people in the face. The boy was eventually released to his mother after being treated for injuries. Rahul, how clueless are American police that they continue to behave like thugs even when there's so much of a spotlight on them?
Well, I'm trying to imagine what kind of briefings are being given in police departments these days. And as far as I can infer indirectly, I think the only thing they're really focusing on is they're probably saying, make sure you don't get caught doing any of this stuff on camera. But we already know anecdotally that what that amounts to, most of the time it doesn't make any difference because they're so used to doing what they're doing. When it does, what it often means is officers decide to turn off their cameras instead of actually changing their behavior. And yet we do know we have a clear example of what can be done if the kinds of briefings and the pressure are right. And this is even in the absence of direct criminal accountability. Look at the Baltimore uprising or riots, whatever you want to call them, after Freddie Gray's death. Even though that involved, among other things, crowds of black kids throwing stones at cops, the police never felt so terrified of the situation that they responded by killing anyone. Whereas in other circumstances, apparently a developmentally disabled man clutching a fork is deemed, a sufficient threat for the police to pepper him with 10 shots. In the case of Baltimore, they had clear instructions not to kill anyone, and they didn't.
Rahul, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
See you then.
Rahul Mahajan is a sociologist and author of Full Spectrum Dominance. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.